Hi, this is Paul, and I have a really special guest on today. This isn't a randos conversation because Raj is not a rando. Raj has been coming to our local meetup and then estuary for how many years now, Raj?
A couple of years. I first one I went to was before lockdown, so it's been a little bit.
Okay. So Raj has given me a lot of good ideas over the years, and um he's been very active locally. When Josiah, some of you might know that Josiah is another CRC pastor in the area who also started an estuary, and so Living Stones has one once a month, and Josiah has one once a month. So there's still some more slots in Sacramento for someone who wants to do estuary, but Raj has been to both. So Raj and I, we've been going to have this conversation for quite a while now, and Raj has been on a very interesting journey. And so I asked him at our last meetup. I said, "Oh, Raj, we got to put this on the calendar." And so here it is, and here we go. And I said, "What do you want to do, Raj?" He says, "Well, let's just do what you usually do." And so, okay, so we'll start with you, Raj. Tell us
Alrighty.
a little bit about yourself.
Well, first I'll do a plug for the North Sacramento Estuary. Hop Garden this Thursday at 7.
All right.
Um, so there's
Which means I
that.
have to get this up soon so it can be
Yeah.
I have to get it up tomorrow.
um, Jump in the queue, I guess. I didn't mean to do that.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
And then I will go into sort of my story. First, I did say that I was going to do this at the last meetup, but for some reason, all along the Watchtower, whenever I think about us having this conversation, that song pops into my head.
The
So
Bob Dylan song?
yeah, Bob Dylan. Although I will sing slash recite, not really sing, uh, the version with the Jimi Hendrix makes an augmentation
Oh,
to the
really?
lyrics in the first chord. Yeah, to the first verse.
I
And
haven't
Bob
heard
Dylan
the Jimi
actually
Hendrix version.
Bob Dylan actually prefers the lyrical changes that Jimmy made. And so it's the only song Bob Dylan plays at every single one of his concerts, and he sings it the way Jimi Hendrix performs it.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
There must be some kind of way out of here, said the Joker to the thief. There's too much confusion. I can't get no relief. Businessman, they drink my wine. Plowman digs my earth. None will level on the line. Nobody offered his word. Then it goes, let us stop talking falsely now. The thief he kindly said, there are those, or, oh man, I should have pulled up the lyrics. um, Let us stop talking falsely now, the thief he kindly said. There are many here among us who believe that life is just a joke, but you and I, we've been through that, and this is not our fate. Oh, so let us stop talking falsely now. And then the last verse is all along the watchtower, princess kept the view, while all the women came and went, their foot servants too. Outside in the cold distance, um, two figures or a wildcat did corral. Two riders were approaching, and the wind begins to howl. So there's just a little bit of a divine invocation of the muse, I guess. Anyway.
Okay. So that's why that's your motivation for quoting this. I mean, how does this connect? Connect the
um,
dots for us.
um, I think there's a lot of people out there who think that life is a joke right now, and um, you and I, we've been through this, but this is not our fate. So let us stop talking falsely now, right? I think that kind of is a good picture of what's happening in this corner of the internet, I think.
Okay.
Um, so, all right, well, I'm Raj Deep, is the full name. I was born in Sacramento, and in this house, actually, not in this house, but this is my grandparents' house. This is where I spent the first 2, 3 years of my life, and then eventually I made my way back here. I was living with my grandmother before she passed away in December of 2021, and was born on Easter Sunday,
Were
April
you
6th.
really?
Yeah, April 16th. It's the only time when the Western and the Eastern churches celebrate Easter at the same time.
Wow.
So that's always been something that, whatever reason, that's part of my story. um, And yeah, I raised in a Sikh household. Um, although my dad does not keep his hair. My parents aren't super religious. We went to Gurdwara, that's the Sikh temple. Um, since I was little, my parents made sure they taught me about the basics. I knew who all the 10 gurus are. I was taught the stories. I was taught a little bit about Barney or scripture. But it wasn't something that was it was there in the background. I wouldn't say it was central though. We didn't necessarily organize our life around it on a day-to-day kind of way, but it's definitely where my parents got their morals from, and where it's the foundation of both of my parents' worldview.
Okay. Were your parents immigrants?
My parents are immigrants. But they came when they were relatively young. My mom is an American for all intents and purposes. She got here when she was about 2 or 3 years old.
Okay.
And then my
Can
dad.
you raise your sound level up a little bit? Do you have that?
Yeah. Let's see. How's that? Better?
Better. Yeah. Good.
Cool. And then my dad, he got here pretty young too. He was about 10, 11. I think.
Oh, wow. So they both came as children.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, I am almost like a second generation American. And my mom is the eldest on her side. So both of her brothers were actually born in America. And then my dad is the youngest. So he's the most, out of his siblings, he's the one who's the most formed by America. And as my parents, as many immigrants, are really proud to be an American. And that's something that is definitely influenced me. Like I love this country. I'm unabashedly patriotic, and which was a interesting experience when I went to college.
Well, let's back up a little bit. So really, your grandparents were the intentional immigrants. Your
Yes.
parents were brought over, but your grandparents came over.
Yes. And in both cases, my grandfathers came over first to secure the resources and, get a lay of the land. So they both came a couple of years before the rest of the family did. And in both cases, the first person who was able to come over to the country was a great uncle, I guess, of mine. Yeah, great uncle who came over on a student visa. And then they petitioned like mad for everybody else to come over.
So why did your grandparents did both sets of grandparents know each other, or just
No.
or not at all? Okay.
No, not at all.
Did they all come to Sacramento?
No. So my dad's side of the family all came to Sacramento, including all of his extended family. And then my mom's side, I think their original stop was Lodi. But then
it's pretty close to Sacramento.
It is very close. But then they ended up settling in Selma, in the Fresno area.
Oh.
And so all of my mom's extended family is in the Fresno area. And my maternal grandfather is one of 13.
Wow.
And so they all came over.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. They had a good immigration lawyer.
Yeah. And then my maternal grandmother, she also got all of her family over. Immigration was a lot easier back in the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
So it's definitely a harder thing to pull off now. You're not going to be able to petition 13 siblings and their families to come over.
Yeah. Why? What was your motivation for immigration?
Economic opportunity, mostly.
Okay.
Things were, well, in India, what you have is family will have land, right? And then it gets divided up by the sons every generation, and that can only last so long without having to buy more land. And then there's also the political instability. I don't know how much of that was a factor explicitly, but I'm sure my grandparents on both sides of the family could feel that anxiety in the air. My maternal grandfather was born in what is present-day Pakistan. At the time, it was India, so he went through partition. He was a child He was a little kid, maybe about 4 years old. But I mean, he's still, and my paternal grandfather as well. And they both, there's trauma there that I don't think was ever dealt with in their lives. Um, my father, or my grandfather, paternal grandfather, he had dementia at the end of his life. And he would have these flashback moments where he was worried about, he would say, the Muslims are going to get me, the Muslims are going to get me. That's a callback to what was happening during partition.
Right.
So
all of your grandparents Sikh?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
There's probably a lot of people who don't know much about Sikh and India, and so why don't you sketch that out a little bit, because that's pretty important, because people don't know.
Yeah. So Sikhi is how we refer to the religion, Sikhism. But you know, the ism label gets complicated for all sorts of reasons. So it's Sikhi, and that is a religion that started with our founder Guru Nanick, and the religion is about 550 years old. Guru Nanak was born in 1469, so it's a relatively new religion, and it originates from where my family is from in India, the state of Punjab. Punjab is unique in the when it comes to India and Pakistan, because there is a Punjab in both. When partition happened, what happened was this, I forget his name, this Brit came over and he was assigned with this job to create the border between India and Pakistan, and he could not give a hoot. He did not want to be there, and so what he did is he got dragged all the way out there, and he basically just drew a line, and he said, this is what the border is going to be, and it ran right through Punjab. And to this day, it runs through families' properties. Like half of your property might be in a different country, because he just didn't care. And so this created the part of the motivation for the creation of the state of Pakistan was so that the Muslims could have their own country. And Sikhs are in Punjab. That is where most Sikhs in the world are to this day. And so the Muslims didn't necessarily want us in Pakistan. And then there's also lots of issues between the Sikhs and the Hindus. So what happens is all the Muslims in India start to move to Pakistan. All the Hindus in Pakistan start to move to India. And the Sikhs are kind of caught in the middle while they're also trying to go over to India. And partition is the single largest migration event in human history.
And there's still tons of tension around Punjab and India and Pakistan. I mean, his lack of competence and diligence has cursed a part of the world where a great many people live to this day.
Yeah. Do your job well. don't do your job while hating it. Or don't do a job that you hate, I guess, because it could have serious consequences.
Yes, especially when it comes to borders.
Yeah. So to this day, there's a fierce border disputes between India and Pakistan, not necessarily in Punjab, but a little bit further up north, and there's what's called LOC, L-O-C, the line of control. And basically these two countries have heavily armed borders with guns pointing at each other constantly.
Yeah.
So
but yeah. The Sikh community has had historically rough treatment from both Hindus and Muslims in
yes.
So there's a long and difficult history there too. And
yeah,
there's go ahead.
Well, historically, during the time of the gurus, the human guruship and the early Sikh community, we were routinely genocided by Muslim empires, including the Mughals and Afghani Empire. And then as recently as 1984, we suffered many would argue, I would probably argue as well, that we suffered a genocide at the hand of the Indian government in 1984, where they sent in a military invasion to our holiest site, and through retaliation on our part, which it resulted in the death of Indira Gandhi, this led to pogroms essentially by Indian citizens against any sort of Sikh that they could find. And then when it also comes to partition, there are two highly important cities for the Sikh community. One would be Amritsar, which is where the Golden Temple or Harminder Sahib is. That's the holy site that was attacked in 1984 by the Indian government. But then historically, our city of political importance was Lahore, which is in Pakistan. So this line basically severed the border is almost equidistant between our holy city and then our political capital. So it's caused a ton of disruption, and it's also one of the reasons why Sikhs are more likely to immigrate out of India than other religious groups or ethnic groups.
And in the United States, what are the major areas of Sikh immigration? There seems to be a pretty strong population here in the Sacramento area, or at least here in the Central Valley.
Central Valley is very big. Some of the first immigrants out of India arrived in the Central Valley, and they were struck by the landscape because it's a lot like Punjab. And I went to Punjab in 2019 for the first time, and it is very similar. Valley. So Punjab means 5 rivers. So it's a rich valley, fertile valley region with lots of rivers, very similar to the Central Valley. And that's why a bunch of Punjabi Sikhs came from Punjab to the Central Valley and set up shop as farmers. And this has contributed to us being a very successful minority group in the state of California. Basically from Yuba City to Bakersfield, you will have Punjabi Sikh owned farms throughout that whole area. And other hotspots would be, there's a sizable population in Michigan. I don't know too much about that population because I've never been there. I've had family move there and move back from there. Michigan and Wisconsin, I'm not quite sure what that's about. Punjabi Sikhs are also tend to be truck drivers, so that's a pretty big truck driving hub, I believe.
Yeah. And
then there's a decent size population in Queens, and that's just a New York City thing.
Yeah.
Because there's a group from
there's populations from all over the world in the New York area. New York City is the second largest Dominican city, from the Dominican Republic.
Really?
Santo Domingo is the first. New York City is the second. So it's just just New York. So
yeah, that's just the city. So
well, what kind of jobs did your grandparents do when they came over?
My maternal
did they get into farming, or did they?
Yeah. So my maternal grandparents were farming. First, this shows you how different the American economy was back then. They worked as field hands essentially. They were just working in the fields, and also a little bit of work in the canneries. And through frugality and hard work and putting their kids to work, they were able to buy a house in cash. Yeah. And so
classic immigrant story.
And now my maternal grandparents, they own hundreds of acres over in Selma, so they did
for them
fairly well for themselves. And then my paternal grandparents in this house that I'm in right now, they came over, did similar things. They started out in the fields, then they got more, I guess you could say, conventional jobs. My grandfather worked at a lumber mill manufacturing doors, and my grandmother, she had several jobs. She cannery at one point, and then She worked at a plant nursery, and she worked as a maid in a motel on Stockton Boulevard. And then she worked 2 jobs and did all the house chores. She's a
Wow.
titan of a woman. She's
Wow.
an absolute titan.
Yeah.
Um,
And when
and
you say
then
hotel on Stockton Boulevard, listeners aren't going to have a picture
yeah,
of
I
what
know.
that looks like here, but yeah, the really nice hotels are not on
No.
Stockton Boulevard.
No, definitely not the nice part of town. Um, so yeah,
So
they were able to, at one point they purchased a kiwi farm, but then they sold it probably before they should have. So that was just a little bit of economic bad luck.
So how did your parents meet?
Arranged. So my dad's eldest brother, his wife knew about my mom's family, and then they started having them talk. And it wasn't like, this is the person you're going to marry, go marry them. It was, we're introducing you. And then they started talking. My dad was in optometry school in Boston at the time, and my mother had finished her master's in communication from Fresno State. And so they started talking. They figured, oh, this seems like it's going to work. And then they got married.
Wonderful.
And then that was in 93. Yeah, I think 93.
Okay.
And then I came along in 95.
All right. Wonderful. And grew up here in Sacramento, and is your father an optometrist?
Yeah, my father is an optometrist. I actually did not grow up in Sacramento.
Oh.
I was born here, but then we moved to Washington State when I was about 3 years old.
Oh, okay.
So I grew up in Washington, and I was up there until I was 17. And then my senior year of high school, right before my senior year of high school,
oh no,
we moved to the Fresno area. So that's where my parents are currently. They've been there for about the last 12 years or so.
Oh, okay.
So I had to do senior year in a whole new high school, which
oh man,
was not fun, but so it goes.
But you mentioned that your parents did participate in Sikh, and so you were raised in it. And what does that now for Christians? They go to church on Sunday, usually go. How does that work in?
So the closest temple to us, closest Gurdwara, was about 45 minutes or maybe about an hour away. So we would go maybe once a month, usually on a Sunday, just because that was a convenient day. And I mean, we weren't very involved. I remember as a child really being drawn to the experience. I remember seeing other kids running around playing in sort of the prayer hall. And even when I was like 4 or 5 years old, that used to really bother me. I was like, what are you guys doing? And
little Jesus in the temple courts action there, huh?
I would never really talk to anybody, but sometimes we would go with family friends, and they would want to do that, and we would do that. I would participate a little bit in that, but it always felt wrong. And I don't know if that was an internal feeling, or it was also, I'm sure it was my parents' influence as well. And so at a Sikh temple, at a Gurdwara, the central routine is you go in, and then our scripture, who is our guru, we can get more into that later, is placed in the center, and you go and bow before it. And then you get some prasad, which is it's equal parts flour, butter, and sugar. So it's absolutely delicious. And you eat that, and you sit down, and essentially you listen to hymns, the performance of hymns, and all the hymns come from the scripture. Our scripture is a book entirely made out of hymns. Everything that is in the scripture can be performed musically. And in fact, the scripture is organized musically.
Hmm.
There in the
accompanied or unaccompanied? I mean,
What was that?
is there instrumentation, or is it a cappella
Yes,
only with voice?
there is instrumentation. We do not use the traditional. Most Gurdwaras are not using the traditional instruments. And then a lot of Sikhs do not know that, but the primary instrument we do use the traditional drum, the tabla, and but then our melodic instrument is the harmonium, which is a European import. And there have been modifications to it, so slightly different tunings and things like that, but it is essentially a European instrument. And so you will play on the harmonium and sing along, and usually there's 3 people performing on the stage at minimum, and so 2 harmonium players slash singers, and then the tabla player. And then sometimes you'll have people in the back who are playing different little chimes, or like a tambourine, and everyone's singing. And ideally, the sangat, or the congregation, should be singing along too. But as people grow more and more self-conscious, that happens less and less.
There's a lot that's true of that in some Christian circles. The bigger sound from on stage and the more musicians, the less the congregation sings.
Right.
Interesting.
And then
is that true over here? Well, you probably don't know too much of what's being practiced over there, although you did visit not too long ago.
Over in India?
Yeah.
It's true over there as well.
Huh, interesting.
Because there's an issue where there is not any sort of officially sanctioned clergy in Sikh, but increasingly individuals are taking more of a hands-off. There's a whole bunch of issues. As people get hands-off and take it less seriously, what ends up developing is a de facto clergy class, which is why it's important to make sure that you're participating. And the clergy class ends up going off into there's a bunch of issues with a lot of the Gurdwaras. So a lot of my cousins are very cynical about the Gurdwara, and they think that it's basically business, and that there's a lot of inner Gurdwara politics and squabbling that happens. And so people get, all the foibles of human nature. People get
that stuff never happens in churches. Churches
yeah,
are just
sure.
bastions of peace, harmony, and unity all the time.
Yeah.
Bible study ladies never fight over the food.
Right. So yeah, all those human problems of power, money, like that's happening over in the Gurdwara too. Luckily, the Gurdwara that I go to seems to be pretty decent in that respect. There's not, because it is very much run by the people who attend the Gurdwara. There's not, what will happen, especially in America and in the West, is people will come, the immigrants will come, they'll start living their life, then they'll build a Gurdwara, and then they start importing people from India to come run the Gurdwara. So like my grandparents wouldn't necessarily, because my grandparents are also uneducated. My paternal grandparents never learned how to read, either one of them.
Wow.
English or Punjabi.
Wow.
They're completely illiterate.
And yet successful enough to raise successful children.
Yeah. And own a home.
Wow.
And they could read maybe singular words, but they're not reading sentences and documentation, right? Like my mother, when she was a child, she was like 10 years old, she was helping her parents do their taxes.
Wow.
Yeah. And my dad, he eventually, he learned how to read, and my aunts and uncles did as well. And so then it was a real family affair to survive and make a living and establish themselves. And it's just really admirable, and you can't just help but be thankful for that.
Yeah, and be tremendously impressed by them and
Right.
their character and their courage and their tenacity.
But so what happens is people will come over, and maybe you have one educated person who comes over and gets the rest of the family over here, but they know it's important to build a gurdwara and to participate in Sikhi, so they will build it. But then they're like, we can't read the scripture, or we don't feel qualified to do this thing. So then, oh, I know so-and-so back in India who's really knowledgeable. And so we'll petition him to come over so that he can basically run the Gurdwara. And so, that was better than nothing, but it has led to various situations of abuse, in terms of a grasp of power. I should say that when you're talking about population centers, there's a huge Punjabi Sikh population in Canada. There's more of us in Canada than in America, and this primarily centers around Vancouver in British Columbia, and then Toronto. And we would go visit family up in Canada. We have distant relatives up there in a town called Surrey. And if anybody knows about Surrey, there's a ton of Punjabi people that sometimes the street signs are written in Punjabi.
Really? In Surrey, BC?
Yeah.
There's a Christian Reformed church there. It's another.
Oh yeah.
It's these. I mean, Canada. It generally speaking, especially since the 70s and 80s, it's much easier to emigrate to Canada than to the U.S.
Yeah.
Well, this is, you see, now y'all who are watching this have an idea why I'm just so fascinated, because Raj is just a wealth of information and stories, and it's so interesting to me listening to all of these dynamics in terms of the religion. Now, are your scriptures, how is your scripture and translation? Is it done in the original language, or is it?
Oh, in the Gurdwara, it's always in the original language.
Okay.
So recently in the last 15 years or so, we've started to project so as the Kirtanis, those are the people who perform Kirtan or the hymns, as they're performing, they will project onto a screen the words in Punjabi, and then it's a little complicated. The actual text it's written in a Punjabi script, but it's a mixture of different languages. So there are several different types of contributors to the scripture. The primary contributors are the gurus themselves. Guru Nanick, gurus 1 through 5 and 9. But then there are these people called Bhagats. Bhagat, the actual definition of the word has something to do with separate or sacred. And so these are devotees. And there are Hindu Bhagats and Muslim ones. There's one Muslim in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and that's a man named Bhagat Farid. And so there's a mixture of different religious backgrounds that feed into the scripture. And then there are Sikhs themselves whose contributions have been put into the Bani or the scripture. And then those break down into two classes. One is Sikhs who are speaking about God directly, a God Burik, or people talking the Baps, and they are talking about the gurus, the human gurus, and praising them. So it's a very interesting scripture because there's a lot of different languages happening in there, and that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to sort of parse out, and why someone who can't read is like, I don't know what's happening here.
I could imagine.
And
but yet someone who can't read, who participates faithfully, will probably be able to sing along, even, you know, I mean, that's the way it goes with, I mean, the written, you know, reading written text and participating vocally, orally. There's, you know, there's obviously overlap, but people do quite well without reading.
yes, and there's also like there is enough of it where it is written in what was the idiomatic language, like the local common tongue of the time. But obviously, being 500 years ago, there's been drift, so it's difficult for a modern day Punjabi speaker to necessarily make sense of the Punjabi in there. People can do a decent job, but it's like reading Shakespeare, right? Um, but this is also one of the very interesting things about what the gurus did, was they were writing in the common vernacular, which is completely contrary to the Indic system. Like Hinduism, not there isn't really a Hinduism. It's a whole bunch of different religions, but that focuses on Sanskrit and this sacred language that nobody speaks and that no one really understands. Not even the people who are purporting to be explaining it. Not in the way that you would your own vernacular tongue, at least. So there's always this, I wouldn't say always, but there's this turn towards the common person in Sikhi, which is central to the religion, and which challenges a lot of the orthodoxies in the various Indic religious systems, even Buddhism, which makes use of sacred languages like Pali, which is what the Buddha probably spoke, but which nobody speaks anymore. And what you see is, it's actually very interesting because there's a second Granth. Granth means book, collection of books. It kind of means something similar to the Bible, and that it's like a library. But there's a second Granth written. There's controversy and debate about the authorship of the second Granth, the Dasam Granth, and so it's supposed to be, a lot of the texts are attributed to Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th and final human guru, or his court. So he had a bunch of poets and stuff, and what you see there is a turn to what's called Braj, and Braj is a sort of a sophisticated form of Hindi at the time. It's still a little bit of a vernacular language, but it's a higher class one. And so what you see from the community is this transformation from this low class vernacular. Like you see this transformation from slave to king over time.
Wow.
And it's so you see the story of Sikhi through the evolution of language, and it's just wild.
Well, let's get back to your, I mean, again, anybody watching this, I mean, this stuff just fascinates me. Culture, language, evolution of religion. I mean, all these things just fascinate me. Well, get back to your story. So your parents meet, and you're a kid who is probably a little bit more interested in the religion of your people than necessarily your peers. How were you in high school?
Okay, so I grew up in Washington. So I think my high school was 97%.
In urban or in a farming community or urban community?
Suburban.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you know where Tacoma is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was right on the other side of the bridge from Tacoma.
Okay.
So Western Washington in the Puget Sound, 97% of my school was white demographically. Never experience any racism or discrimination or anything like that, which was when I got to college and everyone was speaking all their woke stuff. I was like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. People have been very nice to me my whole life.
You didn't say, come on. As a kid, I was fighting the fight.
Right. Although it is important to note, I didn't grow up wearing this. This is a relatively recent development for me.
Right. You weren't wearing it when we met.
No, I wasn't. This is something that it's happened really in the last 6 months or so, but it's been a gradual thing over the last year and a half.
See, all those people that say Paul Vanderklay is a terrible evangelist, they're going to point to this video and say, see, he went to the estuary and he started wearing that thing.
Yeah, so I wasn't marked out. I mean, the skin color marked me out as other, but I didn't have this other religious thing that marked me out as other. But so in high school, I was a band kid. I started band in 6th grade. I've been playing piano since I was 5. So I've always, like, music has been a very big part of my life.
What are you doing Sunday morning? We need a pianist.
I'm busy at the Goldwater doing the Kirtan over there.
All right. Okay. I'll look elsewhere. Go on.
And so band was really, really big part of my life. And I've always been smart. It's just what it is. School was never really a challenge for me. And until I got to algebra 2. I missed a couple of steps in geometry, and that throws off your whole thing for math. I was never really interested enough to go back and actually figure it out properly. And then AP chemistry was also a very difficult class for me. I think I got a 1 on that AP test. But those were things where I was a very smart kid, but because of that, I didn't need the discipline necessary to get the grades that I could have got. I could have gotten a 4.0 if I was more put together and less lazy.
So in other words, you're not an immigrant, you're an American.
Yes, exactly.
You weren't pitching the pennies, and you don't have some big tract of land in the Central Valley today.
And this is caused a lot of friction between my dad and I when I was in high school. He's like, why are you such a lazy piece of crap?
I brought you to this country so you could thrive, and now in the lap of luxury, right, this is what you do.
Exactly. But even with I had a solid group of friends. Started with them in middle school, and then it was a group of there's a core group of 4 of us from middle school, and then in high school we had a few more guys from the other middle school to our group, and all of us were band kids. And we got into typical high school hijinks. We were super excited about getting our driver's license. We were listening to the music you shouldn't listen to and all that stuff. That was a big part of my identity as a teenager, was sort of that hipster thing, finding the obscure music, the bad music, and like sharing it with my friends and feeling
now, when you say bad music, you mean was this sort of, I mean, what was the
scandalous music
for your group, or scandalous just in general? For
scandalous just in general, things like Eminem, Odd Future, yeah,
I'm an old guy. I don't know.
So it's like
I barely know who Eminem is, and I don't know who Odd Future was.
Yeah, so
someone in the comment section will, though.
Like songs where the chorus is kill people, burn shit, fuck school, music like that.
Well, back when I was young, it was Twisted Sister. We're not going to take it. This sounds like a whole nother level.
Yeah, I mean, it was really dark stuff. And then I went through essentially what I would consider a period of depression my sophomore year of high school. We had a lot of rain that year. So Washington, there's always a lot of rain, but that year we almost broke the record for consecutive days of rain.
Oof.
This is like,
I don't know why people live there. Nate Heil, my daughter.
Is she up there?
My daughter's up there now. Yeah, one of them.
So that I'm sure contributed to it, and but then there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. At that age, I had discovered internet pornography. That was really tough. That was very difficult. Um, and also, I never really wanted for anything as a kid. My parents were very successful, and so there's a little bit of this like Buddha thing that happens where you're like in the palace and then you realize that the world is full of suffering. And you're like, well, I'm just gonna lay here and die, I guess. And I think also sophomore year of high school is when The Dark Knight came out, the Batman movie.
Yeah.
And I loved the Joker.
Interesting.
I was like I was obsessed with that character. I remember trying to like I was acting not like I wasn't acting like him in day-to-day life, but I would watch him and then I would like try to replicate Heath Ledger's performance. Maybe by myself, like privately or whatever, but I loved that character. He absolutely fascinated me.
Huh.
And then I read Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which is a Batman story that centers around the Joker. The premise in that story is that any man can be corrupted by a day that's bad enough. And so if you experience a bad day, a really bad day, you will become a bad person. And so what the Joker tries to do in that is drive Commissioner Gordon to the bad side. And so he shoots Commissioner Gordon's daughter, paralyzes her, strips her naked, takes pictures of her, and then sends Commissioner Gordon to this carnival funhouse where he tortures him, shows the pictures of his naked, bleeding daughter. And he's basically trying to make Commissioner Gordon, trying to corrupt him. Because
wow. This was not the Adam West Batman that I watched in the 1970s on TV. This was not it.
No, not at all. Alan Moore is also the man who wrote Watchmen. So
yes,
he's
yes.
Yeah. So then yeah, so that was I was reading that and thinking about these questions. And then there was in the version that I had, there was a short little story at the end of the main story, which was actually written by the illustrator of The Killing Joke. And essentially his premise in his short, it's only like 6 or 7 pages long, but like his premise fascinated me and gripped me. And it was, how do I know I'm a good person if I've never done anything bad? And he's like, well, I need to do, the story goes that the character is having fantasies of doing really bad things. And his conclusion is, I need to do one of these really bad things in order to figure out whether I like it or not.
Wow.
And if I like it, that means I'm a bad person. And if I don't like it, that means I'm a good person. And so then I would prepared with the mute, like I was really in the realm of the demonic at this time.
Holy cow, Raj. This video took a dark turn. Keep going.
So then I would have these fantasies about like maybe doing something really evil. But I guess I have never read Crime and Punishment, so I'm gonna put, but I do know the rough story. So I was experiencing the punishment of the crime without doing it, like the guilt and the shame, like it was already coming at me, just by spending time contemplating these things. And I guess I should back to elementary school. I'm a big time reader, since a young age. I don't remember a time before reading. I learned how to read very young. Maybe I started reading by like 3 or something like that. And so
Before the American spirit really grabbed hold, you were still in
Well,
some and that
mom and
immigrant
dad,
spirit.
mom and dad, they basically homeschooled me while I was in public school. Like I was already reading and doing, like, I had my numbered literacy up before I got there, and then before I got to kindergarten. And I think in first grade, they were buying me these homeschool workbooks from Costco. And so I was like doing, I had to do all the school work and then come home and do third grade work while I was still, and they didn't do any of that for my sister. So,
the patriarchy.
yeah. But yeah, so in elementary school, I've always had a fascination with history. I remember reading all the those eyewitness and DK books that we had about Rome and Greece, and I don't know where this came from. I was like, it's basically like a crash course in like Western civilization, like from the get go. And then also World War II. World War II is huge. I read all the books I could about World War II, and I was really into the Holocaust since like elementary school. Not like I want to know what happened there.
Right. I understand that part.
And so, yeah, there was a few Holocaust narrative books that I remember reading, and I can't find those books since, but it was and it really fascinated me because of how it was actually juxtaposed in my mind between what happened to the Sikhs. Because in middle school, one of my favorite teachers, she was talking about the Holocaust and how Hitler just wanted to exterminate the Jews. And even though I had read a bunch of books about the Holocaust, I was like, I was confused. I was like, he didn't want to convert them. Because like that was like whenever we got genocide, it was like give up your religion and join our religion. But like Hitler just wanted to get rid of them, and I was like, that really hit me when I was about 12 years old. I was like, that is something else.
Wow, that's interesting.
And so yeah, back to high school. Sophomore year was dark, but I did have a good group of friends. I did get into self-harm for a little bit, but it was short-lived period. And then junior year was a lot better. I joined Knowledge Bowl. Some people might know it as Quiz Bowl. That was run by the drama teacher / AP US history teacher. He was a great man. I still can like see some of the lectures that he gave us in my head because he was the drama teacher and he would act them out. And so that was really cool. That was also when I entered into a relationship with my first girlfriend. So that, made me feel better.
Yeah. Girlfriends are great.
Yeah.
Until they're not.
And then we moved away my senior year of high school, and I got the band teacher where I ended up going was really serious about band and bordering on the tyrannical. I used to have dreams about fighting him, physically fighting him. Yeah.
Wow.
And I came from a very like loosey-goosey. So I came from like people in Washington, they're kind of hippie, even if they're not hippie.
Yeah.
Even the rednecks have this like
Yep.
self-described rednecks.
Yep.
Have this hippie vibe.
Washington rednecks are really interesting. Again, reference Nate Heil. He's got that vibe to him too, to a degree. Even nerdy, thinky talky, redneckish. That's Washington State, Pacific Northwest. It's fascinating.
We had a kid at our school. He had a pet pig. And he used to sleep with the pig, and this kid smelled nasty. Oh. He smelled horrible.
Oh. It's one thing to have a pet pig. It's another thing to sleep with them. Although they say pigs are very clean, but maybe not in that case.
He was also in band. He was a good kid. His mom was a band mom, and she She was a really good lady. But yeah, so I left there, ended up in this other in Clovis. I don't know if you know about
Yeah,
Clovis.
I know where Clovis is.
So Clovis is they're not hippie.
No. Different kind of rednecks in the Central Valley.
Yeah, but it's also a lot more buttoned up, a lot more professional. People who you get more of that, the parents taking school more serious than the kids syndrome going on there. Like a really high pressure place. When my sister was a junior, she went to the same high school. When my sister was a junior, there's a string of suicides at the school.
Oh my.
Yeah, like I think 4 or 5 kids killed themselves her junior year.
Oh no.
Yeah. It's one of these kinds of ultra competitive academic, extracurricular, sports competitive. Like the people who were killing, like the first one was the star football player. Yeah.
Oh, that's really bad, because I mean, that's when it gets contagious. Human beings are strange. How contagious we are. But
so I went from this. I mean, my first band teacher, he was there my freshman and sophomore year. He wanted us to strive for excellence.
Yeah.
But he also knew that this was a ragtag band that didn't really, no one was taking care of the program until he got there. Then he ended up leaving for a PhD program my junior year. Then we got this new guy, and he was pretty laid back. Like that same striving for excellence, but it was not at the same level.
Okay.
I recognize that definitely. Yeah. But he, he still wanted us to play good music and stuff like that. It wasn't a complete letting go. But then this guy down in Clovis, he's like, all the trophies were on the wall. We got a win-win-win. He told me something really fascinating. He was always into marching band, and he didn't understand the beauty of concert music until like his last year of college.
Wow.
That was something, as someone who was really struck by the beauty of music, that didn't make it. Like, it was primarily about the competition for him.
My oldest boys did. So Jared, Jared, because he comes to the meetup. My oldest boys did basketball. Okay. And then I had boy, girl, boy. And so then the next 3 did band. And I had no experience of marching band at all. Didn't have marching band in high school or college. And then just all of the whole marching band thing, it was a revelation to my wife and I. We're like, holy cow, they take this seriously. And these competitions are big things. And, it was really fun once we got into it, but it's a whole nother world.
Yeah. And we were starting to enter in that world back in Washington, but they were in it. Like this school had their own semi truck. And so I was just, and added with all of the angst that came along with just one being a teenager, but then new school and all this stuff.
Your senior year.
Yeah.
You just make it to the top of the hierarchy, and now you're at the bottom of the, it's not good.
And then there was also an insecurity and inadequacy thing, because the striving for excellence was so much greater that I was being outperformed. And so that didn't feel good either. But then at the semester mark, I left, and like I ended up having a fight with this teacher. I left the band program. I stayed at the school. My cousin died of stomach cancer. And he told me, you have more than one cousin. Yeah. Because I wasn't going to be able to go to the competition. Yeah.
Wow.
So I left at the semester.
That's pretty hardcore.
I left at the semester mark, and I made a stink about it. And about 8 other kids left the program too.
Oh, if a band teacher told that to one of my kids, I put the fear of God into a vice principal once at my kid's high school. That guy knew I was coming for him, because he did not want me in the building. Anyway, I digress. Keep going.
So then I was like, I'm only going to be here for the school. I'm not going to make friends. Like that was my attitude.
Yep.
I had one kind of friend, an acquaintance. And then I would just like walk around in circles at lunchtime, and then I would do my thing, get all my school stuff done, get my grades up, and then without band, my second semester I had 8th period free, so I got to leave school early. And then at this time, I that my girlfriend from high school, we had actually kept up as a long distance relationship.
Wow.
And she was a year older than me, and she went off to college. And then I was applying to schools, and I applied to where she was, obviously. And then that happened to be the best school that I got into. So I ended up going there. And then my freshman year there, and her sophomore year, we were together, and we broke up at the end of my freshman year.
Oh my.
And then, but Bard, as much as, so I went to Bard College, upstate New York. Well, not upstate, Hudson Valley. And very dramatic place. Went there at the height of like the birth of woke and all that stuff. And people were doing all sorts of crazy things. There were several race hoax events happen on campus. People were calling for violent revolution. The whole trans non-binary thing, I saw all of that stuff bubble up, and like I saw everything that we're seeing now in sort of public life, I saw 5 years before. So when it started happening, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like none of this is surprising to me. I know all of these things, but it was interesting to see that it broke into public life. And then my freshman year was pretty low key. I was hanging out with my girlfriend at the time and a lot of her friends. And then I was enjoying my classes. I went in as a music major, and but I really loved, one thing that I love about Bard is their FISM program, first year seminar. It's essentially a great books course.
And they didn't drop that for the woke stuff, huh?
No, although they did repeatedly try to influence what books were being taught, because the curriculum was too many dead white men. Although my professor was the person who designed the FISM curriculum with one other professor who's a woman, and my professor is Professor Weston, Robert Weston, and he's a very gay man. Very but he's also perhaps the most educated man that I've ever met. A legitimate polyglot, reads Dante in the Middle Italian, reads the Quran in Arabic, reads Plato in Greek, like wow. Absolute powerhouse of an intellect. And he self-described radical Marxist feminist. So he kind of laid a foundation for a lot of this woke stuff. But by the end of my time there, he was starting to realize, hey, maybe this is not the way we want to be going, because he had a freshman girl come into his office crying about how racist she is, even though she's like this sweet little girl who just got to school. And he's like, oh, this is gone off the rails.
That's the benefit of being older. You get all these little white girls running around talking about how racist they are. And it's like, I've known really racist people, right. And that's not really you.
I think he grew up in Louisiana, so like
yeah, so he really knew racists.
Yeah. But I got to walk through the classics of the Western canon with this man, and he didn't have an agenda. Like, I think he wanted to get to the agenda part, but first he was like, no, we have to read and reconstruct the argument, guys. And kids wanted to go in and start critiquing right away. Like, you don't even know what they're saying. So he's an excellent professor, and he was very much like, first you got to reconstruct the argument before you can criticize it. And he's like, he considered his FISM curriculum the most radical curriculum that the school has taught. But part of his radicalness was, this was something he did not get on the curriculum. We ended up reading Augustine's Confessions, but he wanted us to read City of God. Um, and then they're like, no, you can't have freshmen read City of God. um, but yeah, so he was really I took both semesters of FISM with him. I did that intentionally. I knew about him before I had gotten there because my girlfriend had him the year before, and he just sounded like a fascinating character. And then my final semester there, I took what is essentially FISM 2. It's a class that he called Defining the Human. And he had noticed that it's really difficult to define what a human being is.
Yeah.
And then freshman, doing all my little freshman stuff. Sophomore year starts. Girlfriend and I had broken up. That made me real sad. Even though it was for the best we broke up. And then
was your girlfriend Sikh?
No.
Okay.
She's a white girl.
White girl.
Yeah. Half Norwegian, half Croatian.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Dad was not happy about it.
I'm so sorry, son, you broke up.
Yeah. And then sophomore year is when I used psychedelics for the first time.
Oh.
And that was
it's psychedelics in the story too.
That was a major thing that major impact on my life. And now I need to back to middle school. Middle school is when I discovered music, like listening to music on my own. And I don't know what it is about my mind, but there's this admiration for greatness and this and recognize greatness. So I started listening to music. I was like, who's the greatest guitar player of all time? Oh, Jimi Hendrix. So I started there. And then the Jimmy just blew the lid off the top of my head. And I was like, whatever he was doing, I got to experience that. So I knew since I was like 12 years old that I was going to do psychedelics at some point, just because I love 1960s music so much.
I love 1960s music at some point. Clearly not as much as you, because I never said to myself, I'm going to do psychedelics at some point. I grew up surrounded by drug addicts. And so it was abundantly clear to me the last thing I was going to do was drugs, because I was watching what was happening.
Right. I did not grow up around drug addicts. And then also there's an attitude. My parents were very much like, don't ever do drugs. Right. Like that was definitely beat into me. But I'm very open. You know this about me. I score like in the 99 percentile. And then Jordan Peterson always talks about this thing where if you use psychedelics and you have a certain kind of experience, then you're one standard deviation even more open. And that happened to me too. So it's like I really like Chesterton. And there's a great Chesterton quote. I mean, everything he says is eminently quotable, but you want your mind to be open, but not so open that it falls out. So that was a big danger with me, which is why I have to attach it securely. That's right.
Keep the mind in there.
Yeah. But yeah, I always knew. And then another thing when it came to music was, okay, 1964 is when rock and roll started, like the whole thing. And so then I just start from 64. What are the best albums from 1964? What are the best albums from 1965? And I just did like this historical study of pop music, basically. And then, yeah, so I had that experience. And then what that ended up doing for me was, one, it made me I didn't meet or experience any sort of entities. Like I never really understood that whole entity thing, but I did have this experience of permeating presence. And so all I know is I did it by myself, and I went into the woods. Like I knew, and I started by listening to like some hippie music and like some Jesus freak music. Like there's this band called the Trees Community, these like hippie Jesus freaks. And
Never
because I
heard of
knew
them.
that like set and setting were very important, and I was
Yeah.
like, not gonna, this is not a, I was very serious about it. This is
You're a
not a,
sophomore in college, right?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm about 19. And so, and then
You're pretty precocious. Go on. I'm sorry.
and so I went into the woods, and I was out there for a while. I came back, started like looking at people. It was eventually I started interacting with my friends again. And then there was this peak experience where the only way I can describe it is I felt like I was in the womb of humanity. And then there was like this portal thing, and I was convinced that if I went through it, I would be born as a different person. Absolutely convinced. And then I was thinking of going through it. I don't know if I could or whatever, but then I was like, but what happens to my sister? And I didn't. Because I was like, if it is true that I'm going to become a different person going through that, who's going to be there for my sister? And my sister's 5 years younger than me. I absolutely adore her. And she's one of the best people I know. And but yeah, so I didn't end up going through this portal or whatever it was. But all I knew is that after that, I was like, I need to start taking classes about religion. Like that was my conclusion from that. Because I was like, I need to know what that was. But I knew that, like, I think a lot of people go through that experience, and then their way of trying to understand it is like, oh, I'm going to go become a chemist. And I was not like, and then the next semester, there was a class that was all about mystical experience. And then I was actually Mircea Eliade.
Yep.
You know? Yeah.
Yep.
So I started reading Eliade. I majored in religion. And I got onto that whole sort of symbolism kick before I ran into Peterson and Peugeot, mostly through Eliade. And then I actually, I think my second paper for that class about mystical experience was about my psychedelic trip, and I analyzed it using Eliade. I got an A on the paper. And it's like my professor, he is an old hippie himself. So it's like, I think his son did psychedelics when he was 12. And he left Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception on his dad's pillow. Yeah, I know. A very, very odd place. Not something like the experience I've gone through. It's definitely not something I want for my kid. But it is what it, I mean, that's what happened. So
yeah.
And then I think going into, one of my friends from freshman year told me, you're not going to be a music major by the time you leave this place because you're too academically inclined. And I was like, whatever. And then I changed my major to religious studies, and he was right. I'm also not disciplined enough to be a craft musician like the other kids who were in the music program. Like one of my good friends, he lives down in Long Beach. He's a legit session player. Like he started learning a new instrument in his freshman year, and he put in the hours every single day. And then but it was a real, well, it was a real blessing changing my major to religious studies, not only because of the education, but also because of the professors I came in contact with. Because I didn't have a bunch of professors who were trying to fill the God-shaped hole in their heart with politics. So I got a real education from those people. And one of the great things about the Bard education is that, and I guess the liberal arts education in general, is that it teaches you to challenge your own assumptions about what you think. But the problem with that is while you challenge your own assumptions, you become incredibly unmoored. And so if you're not aiming towards something else, it's very easy for you to become ideologically possessed, like so many of the classmates that I saw.
Yep.
And so if you have a bunch of people who are teaching you to challenge your own assumptions and then they're filling it with ideology, it's a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, that was not the case for me. I had people who were interested in actually see me using my brain and cultivating my writing skills. So that was good. And then also in sophomore year, I met my friend Ethan. We were on this channel together.
Mm-hmm.
And he's super disagreeable, but he's also very liberal. He's very much on the left wing of things when it comes to politics. And everyone thought he was an incredible, horrible, racist, misogynist person because he was calling out all the fallacies and all of the illogical thinking that was happening on campus. So then that whole sort of battle with woke consumed junior and senior year, basically. And then after that, my senior year, I did my senior at Bard. You have to write a senior thesis. It has to be a pretty substantive piece of writing. Mine ended up being around like 90 pages or so.
Wow.
And I ended up writing it about Guru Nanak. And the first is in 3 chapters. The first chapter was about a little bit of biography. Second one was so I can't believe I did this now looking back, but it was a commentary on Japji Sahib, which is like the most arrogant thing I could have ever done.
Well, here in college, it's
yeah,
full of arrogance.
And then the third one was just kind of like trying to make sense of the whole thing philosophically with everything else that I was reading at the time. And I became greatly influenced by Martin Buber and his book I Thou.
Yeah.
And also they had a series of, they were starting to realize that something was going wrong on campus. And so we have the Hannah Arendt Center. Hannah Arendt was a political philosopher. She taught at Bard for years. She's actually buried there. So we would go visit her grave and stuff like that. And but because of that, there's the Hannah Arendt Center, and a lot of people who are aware of the patterns of totalitarianism because her magnum opus is The Origin of Totalitarianism.
Right.
And the Arendt Center was noticing all this woke stuff going on, and then one of the initiatives put on by the college was a series of courses that were to be designated under an umbrella category of the courage to be. And the central book that we all had to read, if you were in any one of those classes, was Tillich's Courage to Be. And that book was like these ontological arguments he was making. Like, it's been a while since I read it, but like what he was talking about was a complete revelation to me. This whole notion of the ground of be, and it felt like what I had been chasing and experiencing, or what I became aware of since that that psychedelic experience. And so, yeah, I was trying to make sense of what's happening in Gurbani, and it was greatly influenced by Buber and Tillich and these sorts of thinkers. And then graduated, went to grad school. Also I got my MA in religious studies. Excuse me. Wrote my master's thesis on American civil religion. And there's the second chapter actually goes into this whole digression sort of against Judith Butler. Because I tried to analyze Lincoln from this gender perspective as this like model of masculinity. And one of the things that you notice about Judith Butler is that she thinks that social construction is completely arbitrary. But if you read the actual, like Peter L. Berger, who, and I forget the other guy's name, but Peter L. Berger is this scholar of religion, and he came up with the term social construction. And he says it's not arbitrary. Like there's rules, and it still has meaning. Is a big part of Berger's whole argument. Maybe this is where meaning comes from. He doesn't really put an answer on that, but it is meaningful. And so Butler talks about how gender is socially constructive, and that's why it can be essentially arbitrary. And so they're always wanting to argue against the essentialists, but it's like that's the most essentialist thing. Like for Butler, the only way gender could be meaningful is if it was biologically essential. And so I kind of do this little thing where I use Butler to kind of defeat herself, and then I move her out of the way and talk about something called ubiquitous manhood. This is a great book by
About what?
Ubiquitous Manhood.
Ubiquitous manhood.
Great anthropological survey by a guy named Gilmore. And basically he says that manhood has a ubiquitous form across the globe, which emphasizes man's role as protector, provider, and procreator. And the only places where this is not the case is, one example is Tahiti, and then he gives a second example, but I forget what he said, where that is right now. And basically he says, in these situations, the reason why manhood looks so different is because the environment is so abundant that you don't need that ubiquitous manhood. And so like when the environment is cushy enough, then you don't need to be a man, essentially, which is
like America.
Yeah, which explains a lot of modernity. And then, but like Abraham Lincoln's super masculine. And
yeah.
Chopping logs, wrestling,
all that stuff. Yep.
And so I explore all this, and this is also when I start to get an inkling of this idea that violence is how I've brought this up at estuary meetings. Violence is where objectivity enters the social realm. And without violence, then you cannot objectively define things socially. And one thing that I have learned now that I am teaching at a jail is that no one in jail believes that reality is subjective, but everyone at the liberal arts college did. And I think the level of violence in people's lives has a big influence on this.
Same with the homeless. It's the same with the homeless. People don't realize how much violence is on the streets, but yeah, the homeless get it. It's very objective.
So yeah, I did my master's there and then graduated, was substitute teaching for a while down in Los Angeles, and then moved to Sacramento to be here with my grandmother in her last years, which was, it's not my idea. That was something that came to me through prayer, and it listened, and probably the best decision I ever made. And then I just finished up with my teaching credentialing program. So hopefully by the fall, I'll have my own little elementary school classroom. Also, I love kids. I've always loved kids since I was a kid. Like,
why elementary school? You've got all this fascination with all this heady stuff, and you're gonna spend time with, in very basic things. You do also teach in the jail, though, so that's, we can talk about that a little bit. But
elementary school, I think I would enjoy high school more, part of me. I did substitute in high school for a year as an English teacher, but I do have certain professional ambitions. I do think that I am more of a strategist than a down in the trenches kind of guy, so I think eventually I'd like to move into administration. I don't know, because I don't know what that is like. That's my suspicion right now. And if I enjoyed the classroom experience too much, maybe that would not, I might become too comfortable there in order to pursue those other ambitions. But also there are reasons why I want to be in the elementary school classroom. Almost all of my teaching experience has been in Title I schools.
Yep.
And
you should explain what that means for people outside the U.S.
Title I schools are the schools in areas, in low socioeconomic areas, and so they get government funding, federal funding.
They get special funding, for support programs, free lunches.
So it's like in these schools, all the kids get free breakfast and free lunch. Most of them don't even need to buy their own supplies. And so And you know, there's plenty of stuff in the culture right now which denigrates manhood and things like this, and a lot of these kids also don't have a lot of positive male role models in their life, or any male role models in their life. And so having a big bearded man walking around school is probably good for them.
You can invite me to your school so I can just walk around so you
Yeah.
big bearded man.
Yes.
It's Santa Claus.
Oh, I got to make sure to put a hat on you though. So I'm like, I have this, I'm very excited to get married and have kids when that happens, working on the marriage part. But
he's available, ladies. Not that this channel, although, you know, we had some success in the discords, but yeah, 87% male to female watcher ratio on this channel. Right. So kind of a guy space.
But I have this real urge to, I mean, you got to be careful with this kind of thing, because I have a real urge to father, right? And like, you have to be careful. Like, you can't really go around fathering other people's kids, right? Like, I understand that, but there is a, you know, just being able, and also understanding what's happening with boys. That's really important in the school system right now, because when you have 90% of the faculty and administration as women, and they don't understand what's happening with boys.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I think I would probably enjoy high school more, but I probably more needed it in elementary school. And then also, it's just, I like talking to kids. I love what's going on in their head.
Kids are great. I mean, they can be just so unvarnished. They will tell you exactly what they think and believe. And,
I had a student while I was student teaching. One day he asked me if I was Italian because of my mustache. Then he asked me if I was French because of my mustache. And then on the third day, he said, "Mr. Singh, are you evil?" I said, "Why?" He's like, "Because your mustache." I was like, "No, I'm not evil."
he didn't see any of the rest of it, huh? Just the mustache.
Just the mustache. Yeah.
Oh, kids. Maybe talk a little bit about, because when you first started coming to the estuary meetings, I mean, you've been I don't know, you've been turning into your religious heritage quite a bit more over the last few years. What's that about?
Okay, so I was always having this journey towards religion and God since that sort of psychedelic experience. Even before that, though, having read some of the things that I wrote in high school, I would write about music as this religious experience. Like, I framed it as such explicitly in this paper I wrote my senior year of high school. So that's always been like, donning the sarup, the form of the guru, there's always been a pull to this my entire life. But there's a whole bunch of things. You have a whole bunch of reasons why. One, you want to keep doing stuff you shouldn't be doing. And I wasn't going to wear this while I was still doing that stuff.
Yeah.
And then
really stand out.
Yeah. And also, it's disrespectful to the form. And then another thing, you just have your own sense of not feeling worthy, right? Your own sort of demons that you got to figure out. And then I was doing this thing where I was trying to stand outside of the traditions and like survey all of them and like exploring each one a little bit. So that was like, with the drug thing, my parents were like, don't do drugs, but it was like, but why? And no one, like, because it's dangerous. It's like, we do dangerous stuff all the time. And so I had to go figure that out for myself. And then it's like, you don't do drugs because drugs are a lie. That's why you don't do drugs, because they distort everything.
Yeah.
And so, and you want to live in the truth. And so I spent a while in college going to Buddhist monastery, not like as a practitioner. I was doing a ethnography there. I was dating a girl in college, my second girlfriend, and she was into Buddhism, although she came from a Jewish background. Um, and then
Those Jewish Buddhists are the worst.
Jubus. There's an actual term for them.
No, is there really?
Yeah, Jubu.
Jubus. Oh my goodness. Like, I'm gonna get in so much trouble with Jacob.
No, there's a book that I read. It was about a Jewish man meeting with the Dalai Lama, and he was self-described Jubu.
Jubu. Oh,
Yeah. But yeah, so I was, but then, you know, the whole no self emptiness thing is a real drag. And there's there's something to that in Sikh, but it's not, you don't get rid of yourself to manifest emptiness. You get rid of yourself to manifest the guru, God, right? And that's there in Buddhism. Like, it's not as fatalistic as some people want to think it is. Like, once you empty yourself, then what arises spontaneously is the Buddha nature. Which is defined by compassion, but compassion isn't narrowly confined or defined like how Peterson thinks it is. In Buddhism, compassion really is love. Like there's stories of Buddhist masters beating their students out of compassion. So then, yeah, that happened, and then Peterson rocked my world, you know, as most people at the estuary, and then Peugeot also very much rocks my world. And then I came home, and I just knew what turned me to take. I knew I had to take a religion more seriously. Because I saw what was happening in the broader culture, and it's like, this thing is barely being held together, and nothing that we're going to figure out secularly is going to be able to hold it together. And that might just be an intuition, but I think it's also borne out by what I learned at college through my through the education I received there. And I also was just noticing that a lot of this woke stuff, especially a lot of the gender stuff, is people talking about their soul, but they don't have language to talk about their soul.
Yeah.
Like,
the public society is totally soul. Nobody has a soul.
Right.
Yeah, but my secret sacred self is this, and I must express it, and
right.
It's uniquely me. Well, then why is it contagious? And what?
I don't know. In Christianity, the soul is not gendered, is it?
Nobody has ever asked me that question. I'd never thought of it at all. You don't stop being a male or a female in the age to come. I'll say it that way. Okay. But it's not something that I have given two thoughts about my whole life. So it just shows it's just not on the radar.
In Sikh, God is beyond gender, but the soul is also genderless.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like the distinction between man and female is very much there, but like in Sikh, so there's a concept. This is similar in some Hindu religions of Atman and Para Atman, and so soul and super soul. And so essentially, there's the super soul, which is God, and then little pieces of that soul are in everybody. And so the nature of God is your true nature. And so the soul is explicitly without gender. And so when people talk about them being non-binary, I was like, duh.
It's just... No, and you know, it's so funny because I've never even thought of the question, because again, when Jesus, because Christianity thinks about resurrection, Jesus didn't come back. I could title this video. Jesus did not resurrect as a hermaphrodite or as a non-binary. When Jesus rose out of the tomb, he was a dude.
Right.
So, it's so funny because my whole life long, I'd never even thought at all about that question. Again, probably just because of resurrection.
Mm-hmm. Because that's like something that I've learned since I was a little kid.
Huh.
Because it's that part of you, that thing that's inside of you is the same thing as God.
Yeah.
And so
that's would be quite different from Christianity too.
Right.
Because that line between God, creation, and creator is quite a bit
it's
firmer.
more solid.
Yeah.
In Sikh, it's a thinner line. There is still a level of distinction, but like the goal is to the way theosis works is you're slowly kind of trying to erase that line.
Interesting.
And whether you can actually do that fully, that's a whole different thing. But the idea is that the guru was perfect, so that like guru and God are one. And so whether that means the guru is God in flesh, or like it's whatever guru does is the same thing as what God does, because that line has been. So maybe we can switch a little bit to.
Sure.
Okay. I don't know.
Another 15 minutes or so. Otherwise, I can't go full Joe Rogan because I don't have Joe Rogan's money. There's other things I need to do.
So I guess we can divert a little bit into the scripture. But the short answer is I turned to this because I realized if I don't take up this duty, then everything's going to fall apart. And it still probably will fall apart, but like at least I can try something.
Okay.
And maybe like I can be a repository for my family who's largely secular at this point.
Okay.
Well, it's hard. They're not going regularly. They still know it's important to go, and they still will go when there's a family function, but like people aren't necessarily engaging with the scripture and stuff like that. So like,
what does your family think about what you're doing?
Excuse me. I don't know what my cousins think. We haven't really talked about it, so I don't know what anyone my generation thinks. Everyone in the older, they're like, oh, so good, like that's great, like at least someone's doing it. But it's also like it feels a little empty at times from the extended family. Like it's good, and they're saying it's good, but because they know that they should say it's good.
Got it.
And then my
kind of like in some families when someone decides to become a minister. Oh, that's really good. And they're thinking in the background, you're not going to have any money. You might get weird. And
part of it. Yeah. And then my dad is happy in the sense of I've taken on this responsibility. So that makes him happy. And then my mom, she's really thrilled about it. And I think it's helping her connection as well. And then, okay, so in Sikh, the scripture starts with this stanza. Ik Onkar, that's the first word in the whole scripture. Ik means one. Onkar is something like divine word. It also means something like it has to do with Om. So Om in the Hindu conception is below, middle, above, but it's also Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, so creator, destroyer, sustainer, and destroyer. But it's all one in Sikh. And then God also has this connotation of a cut. And we'll get back to that later. Then the second, and so this Ikwan God, it gets translated most often as there is one God, but it also means something like one reality is, or there is one being. And then you have second set of words, Sat Nam. Sat means true, but true in this conception has to do with permanence. So it's the most permanent thing. The truth is permanent. And I was thinking about this today before we got on, where it's like, it actually gels pretty well with Peterson's pragmatic truth. The more true something is, the longer it will exist. Mm-hmm. And as long as something is in existence, it is true. And then this also ties into sort of this Augustinian conception that the evil is a corruption of the good, because falsehood does not exist. Pure falsehood.
Right.
You cannot have falsehood. Like, it has to, a lie can't exist without some element of the truth. Right. I could say Paul Vanderklay is a woman with red hair, but that only makes sense if there's a real referent there.
Right.
Paul Vanderklay.
Right.
And so it's always a distortion. So,
well, that connects up to the Neoplatonism that, of course, Vervaeke is New Silk Road, because, you know, negation. And if you look into Neoplatonism and I mean, they had a lot of that, and Augustine gets that from Neoplatonism.
Okay. Then you have the second word, nam. Nam means name, identity, meaning, pattern. It does get explicitly juxtaposed with form. It is the opposite of form. And so Sat Nam, true name, permanent quality, permanent identity. Then you have Karta Purk. Purk means something like doer, person, but Sikhs are always highly allergic to referring to God as a person, because it's not a guy with a body. It's not Mr. God, but it is a personality.
Interesting.
Like, this
Even
is
though a guru is a person.
Yeah. There's always this, we're very careful in this because the guru does not exhaust what God is or who God is. He might be fully God, but he does not exhaust. That's what, like, even if you do this 10 times, you're not going to exhaust what God is. And then, so Purik, but then Karta means something like creator or creative principle, but it also has this notion of cut in it. So the way things are created is through cutting, caesura, through distinction. So there is a oneness, and then it gets cut into pieces. And then Nirvao, Nirvad, those are pretty straightforward. Without fear, without hatred. So full of courage and full of love. Akal, Murit. Akal, Kal means death or time, and then all is the negation, right? The prefix a. So not death, not time, outside of death, outside of time. Murit means image or form. So now we have form coming into the mix. Meaning was first, and then form comes in.
Interesting.
But it is the form of the undying and the form of the timeless. So it's the form without a form. Akal Murit Ajuni, beyond birth, not birth. So it's not subject to the cycle of birth and death, but it also, this is like, Guru is one with God, but God does not incarnate. It's weird. Sapang. Sapang means something like self-existent, although I think the closest concept that I've run into, I'm gonna butcher the Chinese. The Chinese is something like Zhe, and that's their word for nature, and that means something like of its own self-accord. So it is the thing which causes itself. Sapang, then Good Prasad. Good is the principle of wisdom, Guru, and Prasad is grace, gift. So this can be realized through the grace of the Guru or through the grace of wisdom. So that's the basic outline of who/what God is in Sikhi.
Interesting. That's right at the front of the book.
And it's repeated at the beginning of every section and in various other places. So like that whole invocation is present in the text, I think a total of 38 times. And then there's a shortened version, which is Ekongkar Satgur Prasad, which shows up like 60 times or something like that.
This is sung?
It's sung, it's also recited. Some people will repeat it, kind of like a mantra, you could say, but like mantras are looked down upon in the scripture or condemned in a sense, because it's, you don't want your mantra to be a formula that you repeat in order to get things. Like it's not magic. You're not, God is not magic. And don't,
similar to Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. Don't repeat your words thinking that the repetition of your words will,
right,
will result in getting what you want. It becomes sort of a form of idolatry.
Right. Don't make it transactional. Then you have Jap. Jap means meditate, reflect, and then you have the first stanza. And the stanzas in the scripture, but in the first composition is called Japji Sahib, and that basically everything you need to know about Sikhi is in that text. And you're supposed to read it every morning, and essentially the rest of the scripture is considered to be, the fifth guru said, someone came to the fifth guru, Guru Arjan Dev Ji, and said, can you give us a commentary for Japji Sahib? And he said, the whole text is a commentary on Japji Sahib.
Oh, interesting.
And so the stanzas are called Boris, and that means something like step or ladder. So each stanza is, and so the first stanza, it starts with a question, and that question comes in the last line of the first stanza, and that question is, give sachiara hoye, give gure krute pal. How can one be truthful? Truthful is in the noun form. How can one become a truthful? By tearing away the veil of falsehood. And before that, it gives you all of these different things of what not to do to become a truthful. And this is where the radicalness of Sikhi comes in. The first line of the composition, of like the actual body of the composition, is Soche sochna hove je sochi lakbar. And that means something like, through 100,000 ritual bathings, you will not cleanse yourself. And now think about what the religious act par excellence is for the Hindu.
It's
dipping in the Ganges.
Right. Okay.
This is the first thing from the composition.
Wow. You see why you get a little trouble.
The second is Chuppe Chopna Hove, Chuppe Chopna Hove Jalai Raha Liftar. Even if you silence, by remaining silent, you will not be able to silence your mind, even if you stay in deep concentration. Boom. Buddhism roasted.
Yeah. Yeah. You got one for the Muslims too?
Well, the next one is actually for a heterodox school of Hinduism. Pukya pukna utri je banna puriye par. You will not be able to satisfy your hunger even by piling up all the worldly goods. Boom, materialist, roasted.
Wow.
And then Pukya pukna utri the sochla. Seha seyanap lak hohe ta ikna challe naal. If you try 100,000 clever tricks, not one of them will go with you. You can't fake it till you make it. You got to do it sincerely. You're not going to be able to fake your way to this. And
what is the goal?
Hukm rajai chalna Nanick likhe naal. Walking in the way of the hukam. And the hukam is the will.
So sometimes in fact, after I get off this, I'm going to make a video. And sometimes in my sermons lately, I've been talking about nature religion versus escape religion. Nature religion, the telos, the goal tends to be in our current existence. escape religion tends to be, there's a problem here, and so we have to get to another place in order to arrive, achieve, be, et cetera, et cetera. Where does this land on that spectrum?
Explain nature one more time.
Nature is, living your best life now, and religion can be a way to, the prosperity gospel stuff. I'm gonna pray, and Jesus is gonna send me a private jet. Jesus is gonna give me what Mr. Beast has to offer. Mr. Beast is a big YouTuber.
So this is so this is something like, live your best life so that you can manifest the escape plan here.
Interesting. Okay.
So one of the things you have to recognize about the gurus is that they were city builders. They founded cities, and they built out a nation within a nation.
Interesting.
So it's like, it's not it's not living your best life in the pursuit of limited pleasure.
Yeah.
It's okay, so Peterson's been talking about this idea lately where sanity is distributed. Ekwan God is something like, there is one reality, right? You are part of that reality. There is one being. You are part of this one being. There's lines in Gurbani, which the gist of it is, oh man, you are caught in duality. You think of yourself as a separate person.
Okay.
This drives you crazy.
Okay. So you can see the connection with some, with a lot of the goal in terms of some of the other religions in that area then, because there's some similarity there.
Well, there's a similarity in the, it's not Advanta, it's not Vedanta. Some people will say you need to study Vedanta in order to understand Sikhi, but it's like, why would Guru Sahib create a whole system and he was just going to be espousing Vedanta? That doesn't make any sense. And that's basically like a substance monism. There's only one, there's only one thing, and you have to basically get rid of any notion of distinction.
Okay.
Right? But the distinctions are real. Gartha Purk. God makes he creates the world by cutting, by making distinctions. There is a sense in which creation is ultimately false because eventually it will end, and it finds its permanence through God's eminence, right? But there are real things happening in the world. It's not like meditate until you transcend this plane and exit samsara. And so there's a whole, this could probably be a different, if we ever do this again, we could go more into the philosophy of this stuff.
Okay.
But there's,
or you could make your own videos.
Yeah, that too. I'm starting to write some stuff about the Sakhis with the stories. So this is a very different literature than the actual scripture. These are narratives from the lives of the Guru. And some people, they cause some level of controversy because there are some people, there's a lot of arguments within the Sikh community.
Religious controversy? Differences of opinion within a religious tradition? Tell me about it.
So some people say that there are no miracles in Sikhi, and other people will say that there are miracles in Sikhi. So the people who say that there are no miracles will dismiss a lot of the things that happen in the Sakhis because there's miracles in them, and they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Even if you don't believe in the miracles can tell you something. And it's like, this is where, reading Eliade, getting comfortable with Peterson and Peugeot thinking has helped me. There's this great story, Guru Amar Das, the third Guru. It's actually really interesting because it kind of turns some notions on its head. So God and Guru are one, right? It's the same thing. This lady comes and visits the Guru, and she's wearing a veil, and she won't look at him directly. And he's like, you're not gonna like lift your veil and look at me. And then he drives her insane. And it's like, whoa, like, why did Guru Sahib do this? And but like if you think about it in relationship to the other manifestations of God, it's like if you look at God, then you go insane. This is flipping that on its head. Um, and so she goes insane, but then a Gursikh, a follower of the Guru, is like, I found this lady like that you drove crazy. Like, how can I help her? And he says, here, give her the shoe or hit her in the head with the shoe. And so he goes and he throws and he hits her on the head with the shoe, the Guru's shoe. So look at the Guru, and she had to be humbled by the shoe to the head in order to come back to reality, right? In order to become sane again. And then here's you two are going to get married. Here's the key to married life. And he gives him their other shoe.
Wow, what a story.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, you gotta humble yourself before that divine in order to make a marriage work.
Oh wow. Well, I think people from this video will get a good taste of you, Raj. And like I said before, Raj has been an amazing part of the two Sacramento estuary groups. And as you can see, he comes to every meeting. And if you understand what we do in estuary, we go around the circle. Raj always has interesting topics. Although lately it's another woman who comes to our estuary meeting who is the one who she says it drives her crazy because people always pick her topics, and she doesn't like that. Most people long to have their topics selected by the group, but anyway.
So you guys, if you guys are interested, you could find my YouTube channel, Raj Dosanjh. It's mostly just songs right now, though.
Well, spell it for me, Raj.
R-A-J and then D-O-S-A-N-J-H.
Okay, that's your YouTube channel?
Yeah. Right now it's just some music that I've written, but I am working on these little analyses of these stories, and I'm mostly gonna write them, but I might make some videos.
Okay. Well, you were doing a podcast before, weren't you?
Yeah, we were. Ethan and I were doing one together, but it just he's very secular, very atheist. And he wanted to do more of a news show, and I'm like, creative differences. Also, we got lazy.
Oh, that American spirit rearing its ugly head.
Hey, John Henry and Johnny Appleseed were a hell of a worker.
That's true. That's very true.
Very, very hard workers.
Yeah, the American ruralists were hard workers, and only some of the urban industrialists. So anyway, no, Americans are hardworking people. That is, when I hear the amounts of vacation that like the French get, we Americans, we don't get anywhere near that much vacation. So
nor would we know what to do with it if we had it.
That's we'd probably visit France. So Raj can be found on his YouTube channel, and he can be found here in either of the Sacramento estuaries on a regular basis. And I suppose if someone wants to contact you, because I think people are probably going to want to people in this little corner, once somebody shows up here, tend to sometimes hunt people down. So if you wouldn't mind putting it in the description, podcastpoet@gmail.com, you can email me there. That's also podcast poet. Yeah, that's also a Substack that I have where I just post poems here and there. Okay. I was doing it daily for a while, but now it's more sporadic. Okay, I don't mind putting it in the notes. I mean, you're the one. If anyone wants to chat, email. I'm here. I like talking. Raj likes to talk. Get that from my mom. Well, I will end the recording right now. So thank you, Raj. This was as fun as I knew it would be. Thanks, Paul. I really appreciate this.